Okay, what I'm going to do now is show you guys how to load screens into the press. Generally, I will keep the pallets kind of in between stations, so I don't have my pallets exactly underneath the print head. And it's a little more difficult with your flashbacks. So what I'm going to do is grab my screen, and how this works is we're going to push the back of the screen into the screen clamp. You can see it does have a spring, and it pushes the back of this clamp so that way you can put your screens in. So as you can see here, with it being between stations, I can lower the front part of the screen down, push it into the back. We'll give that a good push until our screen goes into position. Now there is this other little clamp knob here that you can tighten down to make sure your registration doesn't move, but we hardly ever use those because these cylinders do a pretty great job at keeping it nice and steady. But now at this point, I'm going to take my pallet that has my center line, put it underneath head number 1, and I'm going to hit table up. And you can see that it just moves the carousel up and down. So now I can come here with my center marks and align my first screen up and make sure we're about 3 fingers down from the top of the pallet. So I could move this up a little bit, or I just need to make a mental note as to where to place my shirt basically. So now we have our center marks all lined up for the most part. Looks pretty good to me. Generally I would have a hand holding this down and then turn these clamps on, but I don't think it's going to move too much, so I'm going to go ahead and turn the clamps on. So now we're nice and locked in. Looks like we're pretty centered up. I know we're kind of at an angle a little bit, so you definitely want to get a good overhead view when you're doing this. Now I'm just going to go ahead and table down, and I'm going to load up a squeegee and put ink in the screen and then adjust my stroke length. Okay, I got my squeegee here. I'm going to take out my little pull pin, put this up into the carriage. You can drop it down if you like. To me, this is just a little easier. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to lower the carousel down until it just falls all the way down. And then I'm just going to snug it up. Now I'm going to put a little bit of white ink in here. And with your print head off, you can move the head backwards and forwards and kind of push it out of the way. So I'm going to put some ink down here at the bottom. And then I'm going to put some ink up towards the top. You don't want to put too much ink onto your press because it can just end up making a mess. So one of the things you need to do is just keep an eye on it. Make sure it constantly has enough ink. One of the reasons I'm putting ink up here in the front is just to make sure the squeegee doesn't have a dry pull during its first print. Now what I'm going to do is adjust my stroke length. I do have a couple images combined into the screen for the same job. So I'm going to loosen this up, slide it back out of the way, and then kind of rock this to the front in its print angle, so that way I know it is actually going to clear the graphic. That should be pretty good. Now I'm going to push my block until it stops, and then I'm just going to snug it up. Don't over tighten these guys. You don't have to tighten it up too much. With these little rubber pieces here, they keep them pretty much from moving, so I'm going to snug that up, and that will keep it from going anywhere. Now what I'm going to do next is I'm just going to take my squeegee and I'm going to give it a little bit of a pre-flood, so that way this thing is not rubbing on a dry screen. And it's also important to leave your print head at the back, whichever resting position you decide to keep it in. We have a rear for plastisol ink, so I'm going to keep this to the back, so when I turn print on, you'll see it goes into its flood position. Now, for the sake of this demonstration, which I'm going to completely shove a bunch of ink towards the back, if I turn print head on with it up here, this whole thing's going to turn on, it's going to kick on and slide back, and it's going to push my ink towards the back, which is not what I want, but I'm going to show you what it's going to do. So now we got ink pushed to the back, not too big of a deal. I can turn it off real quick, move my squeegee back a little bit, collect some of that ink. I'm going to turn print head back on again. Okay, so now we're ready to do our first test print. Okay, I got my little test pen on here. I'm going to lay this onto my palette. Palette's still nice and tacky. I like to use water-based adhesive. I'll leave a link down in the description where you guys can get some of this stuff. Now I'm going to rotate this under station number 1. Now with print still on, I'm just going to put it in single mode. Something to keep in mind, guys, if you do have any of these in double mode and you go to press one of your manual mode buttons, whatever's in the double stroke feature, it will print that. So if there's nothing on that palette, you will end up printing onto that palette. Why it's set up that way, I have no idea, but that is something that I learned, and you may learn by accident. So now I'm going to go ahead and hit this manual mode button. So let me see if I can get this in the view. I'm going to hit the button, flood, and then do its first test print. Now we may do this a couple times, just make sure. It does look like it went the whole length. I think I may increase print just a touch. I'm going to go ahead and do that one more time. Okay, so now we have our first little test print here, which I'm going to register the rest of the job onto. Now I'm about to show you some little tips to setting your angles for each of your print heads. With it in table down mode, that is going to be the flood angle that is set at. You'll have to turn print off in order to adjust these. I know about where I like mine. I like mine set to basically have the steepest print angle, so that way I get a nice print. It'll really press that ink through the mesh, and then I like to have it set back just enough so that way it has enough pressure to move that ink across the screen. Some of the thicker inks you may have to put a little more pressure, but be warned, guys, on your stations that do have a flashback, that if you do have too much pressure on your flood, you can see here where it's coming down just a little bit, but if you have too much pressure and your flashback is set really close to your table, you do have the risk, the chance of your flashback actually hitting the bottom of your screen and tearing your screen. Ask me how I know. Now to see where your actual print angle is at, I'm going to put this back underneath my station. Now I'm going to table up real quick. Now you'll see that it flipped to the print position. Let me table down and then table back up. See, now we can take a look at our actual print angle, and at this point you can actually adjust your pressure. So with me, what I like to do is make sure that it's kind of nice and firm. That way I know that it's getting enough pressure to clear the mesh. You do not want too much pressure, because if you have too much pressure, what it ends up doing is making your blade just kind of start to bend back like this, and you don't end up getting too much. The results basically is you're not going to have a print that's going to clear the mesh. So too much pressure is bad. You want just the right amount to clear the mesh. And basically there's a fine point between having too much pressure and which is just really smashing the print down, and it ends up not clearing it whatsoever, or having too little and it not clearing it again. You just got to find that nice in-between spot. With your stations that do not have the flashbacks, it's definitely going to be easier. Like I said, just put your print stations or your palettes kind of in the in-between point. Take your screen, just come up and underneath. And then just push your screen back, and then pop the front of your screen in. Now I had this locked down at some point, but we're all nice and situated. Now I'm going to go through and set up the rest of these screens. I got 3 more to do, and then I'm going to kind of do a pre-registration, and then I'll show you guys how to use the micro registrations. Alright gang, I put some tape over my base print, registered everything up, inked all my screens up. Here obviously we got a red, we got a cool gray here, and then we have a metallic ink, so silver metallic. And then we got our white highlight. Apologize, my camera did die while I was trying to demonstrate how to use the micro registration. Alright, so what we're going to do at this point is I'm going to turn all the heads on that have colors, which is 2, 3, 4, and 5. I'm going to turn 1 off because we do not need the white base to print, and I'm going to put it in sample mode. I'm going to go ahead, I'm just going to put it in automatic mode. Now I'm going to go ahead and put this in sample mode. Now you'll see the palette here will go around. If I had this activated, it would print. So it's not going to print that white. You want to be careful not to get too close in between these stations here while it is in auto mode. So now, head 2 is going to flood, and you can take a look at my angle there. It's fairly upright. And you could hear that screen stick to the palette. That's one of the things I was telling you guys about. Now it's coming over this station here. It's going to do our cool gray. Next is going to go over to our metallic silver. You can see it's fairly upright and have it going at a nice even pace, not too quick. And lastly, onto our white. Looks like I could probably use a little bit more of a flood angle because it didn't flood enough of that ink. Now it's going to come over here to station number 6. Then it will finally rest over here. And now it will just stop. Alright, now that we have our sample print done and we're ready to go to production, what I'm going to do is warm up these palettes. I got my 2 flashbacks on, and then we'll show you how all this works during the process. I was hoping to show you during the kind of setup sample process, but I'll show you how all this is working when it's in automatic mode and we have some shirts on the press. But we have to warm this thing up first. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to make sure print is off, and I'm just going to put it in auto start. The palettes will just rotate around and go underneath the flash, and I'll let that warm up while my dryer is warming up. So we got this one set to print flash. I want it to just print that white base. And then our other flash over here. I think we may set this to print flash, because we are not using a white base underneath this silver, so that will make it a nice bright silver. So I'm going to let this do its thing, and we'll be right back, and I'll show you this thing in action and how the print comes out.